What if a full-size passenger bus could move without diesel, without batteries, and without ever stopping to recharge? No fuel tanks. No charging cables. Just motion. That's the claim surrounding what many are now calling a world first. Maxwell Chikumbutso's self-powered bus, reportedly operating without fuel or charging of any kind. And if true, it doesn't just challenge the transport industry, it challenges everything we think we know about energy itself. This isn't a concept sketch or a lab experiment. This is a road-ready bus, carrying passengers, navigating real streets, and doing something that should be impossible under conventional engineering rules. As footage surfaced and witnesses began sharing accounts, one question echoed across the world. How is this bus actually moving? Maxwell Chikumbutso, the Zimbabwean inventor already known for his controversial self-powered vehicles, claims the bus uses a closed-loop energy system. According to patent descriptions and technical explanations, the system captures energy from motion, vibration, electromagnetic interaction, and mechanical stress, then continuously recycles it back into propulsion. The result is a vehicle that doesn't consume energy in the traditional sense, but manages and reuses it with extreme efficiency. From the outside, the bus looks ordinary. Large chassis, passenger doors, windows filled with curious faces. But inside, there's no engine roar, no fuel indicators, no battery percentage anxiety. Instead, sensors monitor energy circulation in real time, balancing input and output, so the system remains stable as the bus accelerates, brakes, and navigates traffic. When the bus first began operating publicly, reactions were immediate. Mechanics inspected it. Engineers questioned it. Passengers filmed it. The bus completed routes without refueling, without charging, and without showing signs of energy depletion. Each completed trip intensified the mystery and the debate. Critics were quick to respond. Some called it impossible. Others demanded independent verification. Thermodynamics was invoked. Physics textbooks were quoted. But the bus kept moving, route after route, day after day. And that persistence forced even skeptics to admit something unusual was happening. What makes the bus especially disruptive is scale. A car running independently is one thing, but a bus, heavy, load-bearing, constantly stopping and starting, demands enormous energy. If a system can sustain that without external input, the implications are staggering. Public transport without fuel costs. Cities without charging infrastructure. Rural routes no longer dependent on diesel supply chains. In regions where fuel shortages cripple transportation, a bus like this isn't just innovative, it's transformational. Communities that rely on unreliable energy networks could suddenly have consistent mobility. Goods, people, and services could move freely, regardless of grid access. Behind the scenes, engineers studying the system describe it as less about creating energy and more about eliminating waste. Every inefficiency traditional vehicles ignore, heat loss, vibration, resistance, is captured, redirected, and reused. Motion itself becomes the fuel. The bus doesn't fight physics, it exploits overlooked aspects of it. As footage spread globally, so did the pressure. Government officials began asking questions. Transport authorities requested demonstrations. Energy companies quietly took notice. Because if this bus works as claimed, it doesn't just compete with diesel or electric transport, it makes them obsolete. And yet, for all the attention, the most unsettling detail remains this. There is no moment where the bus plugs in, refuels, or powers down to recover energy. It simply continues operating, as if the act of moving is enough to sustain it. Which raises a far bigger question, not just about this bus, but about the future of transportation itself. If motion can sustain motion at scale, if energy can be recycled this efficiently, then what other limitations have we simply accepted without challenge? And that possibility is exactly why the attention surrounding this bus keeps intensifying. Because once you accept that a vehicle of this size can sustain itself in motion, the conversation immediately shifts from curiosity to consequence. Transportation authorities begin to ask what this means for national fuel budgets. City planners start questioning whether charging infrastructure will even matter in the future. And engineers around the world start re-examining assumptions they were taught never to challenge. Inside the bus, the experience feels strangely ordinary. Passengers board, take their seats, and ride through the city as they always have. There are no warning lights, no power alerts, no interruptions. The bus stops, accelerates, turns, and idles in traffic like any other, but without the familiar signs of energy consumption. That normalcy is what makes it unsettling. Revolutionary technology usually announces itself loudly. This one doesn't. It simply works. Technicians observing the system point out that the key lies in constant balance. The bus is never allowed to waste energy. Every micro-event, braking pressure, suspension movement, rotational drag, is monitored and redirected. Instead of relying on stored fuel or stored charge, the system prioritizes continuous recovery. Energy is not stockpiled. It is circulated. Motion feeds motion. This is where the debate becomes intense. Some experts argue that such efficiency shouldn't be possible at this scale. Others counter that modern transportation has always been wasteful by design, discarding usable energy because fuel was cheap and abundant. Remove that assumption, they say, and entirely new architectures become possible. What's undeniable is the behavioral change the bus introduces. Operators no longer worry about fuel schedules. Routes don't need to be optimized around refueling points. Downtime decreases. Operating costs drop dramatically, at least in theory. For developing regions, where fuel prices and supply disruptions can cripple public transport, this kind of system could mean stability where there was once uncertainty. As demonstrations continue, interest spreads beyond buses. Observers begin asking whether the same principles could apply to freight trucks, trains, ships, or even industrial machinery. If large-scale motion can sustain itself through intelligent recovery, then transportation may be just the first domino. But with attention comes pressure. Demands for third-party testing increase. Regulatory bodies want access. Competitors want explanations. And critics grow louder, insisting that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The spotlight becomes relentless, and every mile the bus travels adds both credibility and scrutiny. Still, the bus keeps running. Morning routes. Evening routes. Passenger after passenger. No refueling. No charging. No visible intervention. Just continuous operation in plain sight. And that persistence is what unsettles the industry the most. Because technologies that fail usually do so quickly. This one doesn't. It accumulates distance. It accumulates data. It accumulates witnesses. Behind closed doors, discussions are already shifting from "is this possible?" to "what happens if it scales?" Because once a self-sustaining bus enters mainstream transit, fuel supply chains, energy pricing models, and infrastructure investments all come into question. And at the center of it all is a simple, uncomfortable idea, one that transportation has avoided for over a century. What if movement itself is enough? What if the future of transport isn't about finding new fuels, but about finally stopping the waste of the energy we already have? And if that's true, then this bus isn't just a vehicle on a road. It's a signal. That signal is now being felt far beyond the streets where the bus operates. Universities began assigning research teams to study the principles described in Maxwell's patents. Engineers run simulations late into the night, trying to understand how such high levels of energy recovery could remain stable over long periods. Some admit privately that while the concept feels uncomfortable, the data coming from real-world operation is even harder to ignore. What makes this bus different from past breakthrough claims is visibility. This isn't hidden in a laboratory or protected behind closed factory doors. It's operating in public. People ride it. Drivers operate it. Routes are logged. Time passes, and the system doesn't collapse. That alone forces a pause in the usual cycle of hype and dismissal. Transport officials quietly observe patterns. Maintenance intervals appear reduced. Operating costs trend downward. There's no dependency on fuel deliveries or grid availability. In regions where buses are often grounded due to shortages, this single factor becomes revolutionary. A transport system that doesn't stop because supply chains fail is no longer just innovation, it's resilience. At the same time, resistance grows. Established energy players question safety. Critics argue that long-term degradation hasn't yet been proven. Others demand international oversight before such systems are allowed to scale. The debate grows louder, but it also grows more serious. This is no longer about mockery or disbelief. It's about control, standards, and what happens when an old system feels threatened. Meanwhile, passengers remain largely unaware of the controversy swirling around them. They board the bus, pay their fare, and reach their destination on a vehicle that technically shouldn't be able to do what it's doing. And that quiet normalcy is perhaps the most disruptive element of all. There's no spectacle, no dramatic reveal, just consistent operation, day after day. Engineers observing the system begin to describe it less as a machine and more as an ecosystem. Everything is interconnected. Nothing is wasted. The bus doesn't overpower resistance. It adapts to it. When load increases, recovery increases. When motion changes, the system responds in real time. It's not brute force. It's balance. This reframes the entire energy conversation. Instead of asking how much power a vehicle needs, the better question becomes how little it can afford to waste. For over a century, transportation design assumed loss was unavoidable. Heat, vibration, drag, acceptable casualties of movement. This bus challenges that assumption directly. And once that idea takes hold, it becomes difficult to unsee. Observers start looking at trains, trucks, even factories, wondering how much energy is being discarded every second. If this bus can recover enough to sustain itself, what else could be redesigned under the same philosophy? Yet, even as the implications expand, one critical moment still hasn't arrived. The moment when the world must decide whether this technology is treated as a curiosity or as a turning point. That question begins to echo louder as more eyes turn toward the routes this bus travels. Independent observers start timing trips, documenting schedules, recording uninterrupted operation across weeks instead of hours. The longer the bus runs, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Skepticism doesn't disappear, but it evolves. The tone shifts from outright denial to uneasy curiosity. Behind the scenes, transport planners begin running numbers. Fuel budgets, maintenance cycles, downtime costs. When those figures are compared to a bus that doesn't refuel and doesn't recharge, the contrast is unsettling. Even a partial adoption of such technology could reshape public transportation economics. Entire cost structures suddenly look outdated. Engineers studying the system describe a subtle but radical shift in design philosophy. Traditional vehicles are built around energy input. This bus is built around energy continuity. Instead of asking how to supply power, the system asks how to prevent loss. Motion, load, resistance all become contributors rather than obstacles. The bus doesn't fight inefficiency. It absorbs it. As more demonstrations are requested, Maxwell's team remains cautious. Each appearance increases exposure, but also risk. The more attention the bus receives, the more pressure there is for absolute transparency. Every sensor reading, every performance metric becomes critical. Because one failure wouldn't just affect a vehicle, it would affect belief. Still, the bus continues its routes. Drivers report an unusual sense of confidence. There's no fuel gauge anxiety. No concern about detours or delays. Routes become flexible. Schedules become resilient. For the first time, public transport begins operating independently of external energy uncertainty. Passengers begin asking questions. Not because the bus feels different, but because it doesn't. That's the paradox. The most disruptive technology in decades feels completely normal once you're inside it. And that normality is contagious. People start imagining what else could work this way. Could emergency vehicles operate non-stop during disasters? Could rural transport function without fuel deliveries? Could cities redesign themselves around motion instead of supply? The conversation expands beyond transport. Energy experts start debating whether efficiency, not generation, has always been the real bottleneck. If massive systems waste less, maybe humanity's energy problem looks very different than we've been told. And through all of this, the bus remains on the road, not as a prototype hidden away, not as a promise for the future, but as a functioning vehicle, quietly accumulating evidence with every kilometer. The longer it runs, the harder it becomes to categorize. Not myth, not miracle, not marketing. Something else. Something that forces a pause. That shift in burden is subtle, but powerful. Instead of asking believers to explain why the bus works, skeptics are now being asked to explain why it shouldn't be allowed to keep running. Because at this point, the bus isn't making promises. It's logging hours. It's completing routes. It's doing the one thing theories can't do on their own, operating in the real world. Whispers begin circulating in industry circles. Some manufacturers quietly send engineers to observe. Others issue cautious statements, framing the technology as interesting but unverified. Yet behind closed doors, internal reports start to surface, outlining what even partial success would mean for existing business models. Fuel supply contracts, charging infrastructure investments, maintenance ecosystems. Entire value chains suddenly feel fragile. What's especially unsettling is that the bus doesn't require a radical redesign of cities to function. No new roads, no specialized stations, no massive upgrades. It uses the same streets, the same depots, the same stops, yet operates under a completely different energy logic. That compatibility makes it dangerous to ignore. Researchers analyzing long-term behavior notice something else: stability. The system doesn't degrade rapidly. Energy balance remains consistent. Components show less stress than expected, precisely because the system redistributes load instead of concentrating it. The bus doesn't push itself to extremes. It stays in equilibrium. That balance may be the real breakthrough. As weeks turn into months, the narrative around the bus evolves again. It's no longer framed as a single invention, but as proof of a broader principle. That motion doesn't have to be wasteful. That scale doesn't have to mean inefficiency. That transport systems can be designed to cooperate with physics rather than overpower it. Public curiosity deepens. More passengers ride with awareness now, not just convenience. Some record their trips. Others ask drivers questions. A few simply sit quietly, realizing they're participating in something unusual, a system that challenges assumptions older than any of them. And yet, for all the analysis and debate, the most important detail remains unchanged. The bus keeps running. Not faster, not louder, not differently, just consistently. Each completed route becomes another data point. Each silent stop another contradiction. Because in the end, revolutions don't always arrive with noise or spectacle. Sometimes they arrive on familiar roads, carrying everyday passengers, following ordinary routes, quietly doing what was once believed impossible. Maxwell Chikumbutso's bus didn't announce a new era with flashing lights or bold declarations. It simply kept moving. No fuel, no charging, no interruption. Mile after mile, it turned theory into routine and routine into evidence. Whether the world embraces it or resists it, one fact can no longer be ignored. A system like this forces a question that reaches far beyond transportation. If energy can be recovered, balanced, and reused at this scale, then what other limits have we accepted without ever truly testing them? The bus is no longer just a vehicle. It's a challenge to engineers, to industries, to assumptions that have gone unquestioned for generations. And as it continues down the road, one truth becomes clear.